Okay, so here we go. Good morning, everybody. Laura Hunter from Drop the Leash Dog Training. I'm here with Celeste Gagnon, also from Drop the Leash Dog Training, and we are here this morning to talk to you all about how you deal with any fears that your dog may develop over the course of their life. So we're going to be talking specifics today, some training specifics about what owners can do. So these days it does seem to be a big ticket problem. We have a lot of COVID puppies coming up and through, and life isn't quite what it used to be in terms of getting everybody out in the world. So I have to say up front that it's not the simplest process for dog owners to work with fear in their dogs. And as a trainer, I'm trying to make it more user-friendly for our clients, but we'll talk about that a little bit more later. And we're just going to get into the specifics right now. And what I wanted to start with is that, first of all, you have to understand what your dog's going through. Because if you don't understand the fear and what it is to your dog, you can't help. And I guess the big difference is people, dogs, is that your dog is truly afraid. They're not just mildly concerned or a little bit worried. In most cases, the dogs that we see are really afraid. And it's interesting because out in the wild, I've talked about this before, but in the wild, fear is normal, and it's actually a survival tool for animals. So if you live out in the wilderness, you encounter something new in the environment, it is something that could kill you if it's not familiar to you. And so the animals who are afraid of novel situations or new encounters out in the world are the ones that survive, and they're the ones that pass on that tendency to be fearful down through the generations. So there's many, many things in our world that our dogs can be afraid of, and often those things make absolutely no sense to us as humans. So I'm going to ask you a quick question, Celeste, because between you and I, we have 5 dogs, and our dogs are not puppies anymore, and they seem to be more or less as normal as dogs can be, even though they are herding dogs. Do Penny or Gimli have anything they're afraid of that might not seem logical to people?
I'm going to say, yeah.
Just a question. Maybe not.
Well, I think, yeah, Gimli has a fear, although I know now where it comes from. He has a fear of car alarms and fire alarms, which does make sense to me.
Yeah,
Penny, yeah. Penny is a very anxious dog. I don't know if she has any specific fears, but she gets anxious about a lot of things.
Yeah,
it's different. Fear and anxiety is different, though.
Yeah, we have weird phobias in ours. Maybe just have strange dogs. I did bring a cheese tube today, which is something that we use a lot in training. And all this is a tube full of Cheese Whiz. And Maddie is absolutely, totally petrified of it. Mm-hmm. And I cannot get her past that. And I think Rosie, who's a pretty outgoing, confident dog, has 2 fears: sewer grates on the road, and there's something about washroom cubicles that terrify her too. So maybe it's a small space, I don't know, but that's the only place I've ever seen her really flip out is in the washroom cubicle. So that's way too much information there. I know. So we see a lot of it because we run agility here. Definitely in the agility program, what's normal for us to be, for dogs to be afraid of, isn't always to people. Other people wonder why their dogs are afraid of the teeter or the dog walk or the A-frame.
The A-frame, I forgot about that. Penny was afraid of that.
And some dogs are even afraid of just going over a jump.
Yeah.
And it's really hard for people to understand that that is true fear. And I often hear these comments, "Oh, it's nothing," or we say to the child, "Don't be so silly," or "What's the big deal here?" And a lot of people think, "Oh, it's not really a big thing. The dog is just, if we keep doing it, the dog will get over it." But that's not how it works. So what we have to start off realizing is that it isn't about us. We don't get to determine whether the dog should be afraid or not. It is about the dog, and how they feel drives the whole process of changing it. And actually, we aren't trying to change the behavior. And a lot of people get mixed up with that. If we just change the dog's behavior, if we see the behavior change, everything will be fine. But what we're trying to do here is change an emotion. And we don't have a lot of control over how somebody, whether it's a human or whether it's a dog, how they feel about something. So it really, this whole process is under the control of the dog. So we have, I think what I did was I set this up as some questions that I often hear from people. So Celeste, I'll just get you to keep me on track through the questions.
What is counter conditioning?
Oh, okay. So counter conditioning is a science-based process that changes your dog's emotional response to something they are afraid of. What we'll do is we'll call it a trigger from now on, just for ease in the conversation. And what we do is we pair the trigger with something totally amazing that your dog absolutely loves. So usually extra special high value food is what we work with, because it's easy to control food. And we do it in such a way that the trigger actually predicts the appearance of that really great stuff. So after your dog notices the trigger, you bring out the super duper high value stuff and you deliver it to them. And then when the scary thing or the trigger goes away, you stop feeding the dog. So hopefully what happens over time is that the trigger comes to predict amazing stuff. So your dog starts to develop a positive feeling about that trigger. It's science, it does work, but it works in most cases. There are exceptions, but it has to be done correctly in order for it to be successful. Okay. All right, next question. Okay, Celeste, I have lost your sound. I'm not sure how. Let me just...
No, that's me. Sorry. I muted it because Penny was giving me her whale songs.
Oh, okay. Okay. All right. So I'm not good at lip reading.
Are there rules as to how to do it?
Yes. Number one rule written in stone, golden rule, is that your dog always has to feel safe in the process. It's their choice to participate, their choice to leave or stop participating if they feel uncomfortable. And we can never, ever pressure or coerce them into trying to move closer to the trigger or deal with more intensity in the trigger. There can be absolutely no pressure from us in this process. The dog goes through the process at the pace at which they are comfortable. And this is really, really hard for pet owners. And it's often where it goes, where everything fails. And it's not out of any, it's not anybody's fault. First of all, humans are impatient. And often they don't understand the intensity of the fear that the dog is feeling. And really, and also sometimes difficult to read the dog's body language. Somebody said something to me the other day about, wow, how did you pick that up? That was so subtle. But we have lots and lots of experience, lots and lots of practice of looking at dogs, whereas your average owner, doesn't, like, why would they, have to be that sort of, that concentrated on it. So hard to read subtle signals. And the other thing is that owners, and rightly so, want their dog to succeed as quickly as possible. They want to get to the point where the dog feels good about whatever it is, but you can't rush it. And that is really, really hard to do. So yeah, that's a tough one. So rule number 2 is that we have to do all of this in the right order. And so if people don't understand what we call the order of events, it doesn't work. So I see this very often is that somebody's about to, their dog's about to see a trigger and they have food in their hand already because you want to get the food there as quickly as possible. But that backfires on you because the appearance of the trigger has to predict the food or the good stuff. So there's no dog on the planet that doesn't realize that you have food in your hand if you have food in your hand. So that in the dog's brain, that is coming before the trigger. So the good stuff is actually predicting the scary stuff. It was backwards. We don't want that to happen. So, if your dog sees a bite and you then bring out the cheese, well, great. The bite is predicting my dog's favorite thing in life, which is cheese. This is good. But if you're standing there with the cheese in your hand waiting for the bite to zip by, it's not going to work because then the dog's favorite thing in life is predicting something scary. So we call it backwards conditioning. Totally, totally non-effective. So, yeah. So what do you do? If you are trying to do this, if you're trying to get that predictive process going, you have to have your food hidden at the very least. So, in your pocket, in a treat pouch, somewhere where the dog doesn't see it. You don't put your hand in the treat pouch at any time during the walk. What I do here at home is if I'm going to trim the dog's nails, say I'm trimming Maddie's nails in the kitchen, I'm going to pull cheese out of the fridge, but I would put it on the table or the counter long before I was going to do this, and it would just sit there. And sometimes I could even go over, just put my hand in the bowl and take my hand out empty and keep on walking. So it's there, but Maddie starts to understand that it's not really predicting anything is going to happen. And I might do that at other times as well when I'm not going to be trimming her nails. So she doesn't see that as a cue that somewhere during the morning she's going to have her nails trimmed. So you have to really think creatively so that that food isn't on sort of front and center when the scary thing shows up. And that's hard to do. Sometimes that's hard to do. Quite often that's tricky. All right. So what have we got next? Those are the two big rules I think that I have to stick with.
How do you know it's working?
Okay. So your dog will tell you. Especially if you understand your dog's body language and when they look afraid and when they look happy. What will happen eventually is that if the process is working, your dog will look at the scary thing, and then they're going to look at you as if to say, hey, where's my stuff? And at that point, your dog, that your dog understands when they see that trigger that they know it's going to predict the good stuff. Some dogs might look really happy. That you might see that look of happy anticipation. I know at times I see that with Rosie when we're doing counter conditioning to anything. Some dogs might not look so exuberant. Maddie doesn't show a lot of enthusiasm, but the fact is, if I really look at her body language, she doesn't look afraid either. And I also know that she's willing to stay and participate in the process without me coercing her. So I don't think I'm ever going to see happy anticipation from Maddie in a counter conditioning process. But there are other signs and that I can rely on. So,
do you just give the dog the food directly?
You can. You can be walking down the street. Your dog sees something they're afraid of, another dog or a person, and you can just start to feed them directly and hand them the food. There are two ways you can actually do it. You can simply feed your dog the food while he's looking at the trigger, or you can ask your dog for you can ask them for a behavior, as long as it's a behavior that you can really heavily reinforce. So if your rate of reinforcement is really high, your dog, you might ask your dog for a sit, and the dog's sitting there looking at you, they still know the trigger is there because, you know, they can see it out of the corner of their eye, or you can actually just ask your dog to look at you, but you have to be able to reinforce it a lot. You have to have that high rate of reinforcement, and that's it's an interesting solution, because there are times in life when we've worked with dogs here, or I've looked, you know, I don't think it's happened with my dogs, but with clients' dogs, and we're not sure if the dog is actually fearful. So if your dog isn't fearful, reinforcing the alternative behavior is great, because even if they're not afraid, you're reinforcing them, you're building a behavior, an alternative. So, you know, and we know sometimes, yeah, we see dogs react. Sometimes we're not sure why. So definitely the alternative behavior is a great thing. I use Find It a lot. I used it a lot for Maddie with other dogs in the beginning, because, and Find It, for anybody who doesn't know what Find It is I just throw food on the ground a piece at a time and tell her to find it. That was a really good one for her, because finding food on the ground is a good job for a dog, and it gave her something she could really focus on while there were other dogs present, and that was great. That was great. But you just have to make sure it's a behavior your dog's pretty good at, so that they can get that rate of reinforcement. So definitely, I always think it and again, I'm assuming here, but having, you know, been afraid a few times in my life of specific things, I always think it's better. I always found it easier for me to actually be doing something rather than just standing there staring at something that terrified me. That is not a scientific observation, but just a personal anecdote on that one. So, yeah.
Well, it's a nice distraction.
Yeah. Yeah, you still know it's there. You still know that the scary thing is there. It hasn't disappeared. It's still in the same spot, but it gives you something to do than just standing there obsessing about it. That's for sure.
Yeah.
Yeah, I think so. Yeah.
So what if the dog is too excited or upset and can't take the food?
Okay, so in order to work as effectively as possible, we actually pair counter conditioning with another scientifically based process called desensitization. And desensitization just means that you are exposing your dog to the trigger very, very gradually, in such a way that they're never upset and they don't go over threshold. So if anybody doesn't know what that means, your dog going over a threshold, it's when your dog gets too excited or too upset. And when they do get excited or upset, they can't think. You know, when your dog gets stressed out or overexcited, it kind of shuts down the thinking portion of the brain, and they can't. So counter conditioning pretty much always goes hand in hand with desensitization. And some specific examples of desensitization, if say you're out, you know, walking your dog in the neighborhood and your dog's afraid of children, or they're afraid of other dogs, or they're afraid of people, you want to make sure that they are at enough of a distance from them that it is not too intense for them. So, you know, in our reactive dog program, Walks at Work, the first thing we teach people is a turn and go, so that if you see the trigger and you're too close, you can immediately turn, go the other way, and get to a distance at which your dog can cope. So that distance is huge in counter conditioning and desensitization. And you always want to be at the right distance. But, you know, if it's something else, if it's noise, you want, well, again, that's kind of a distance thing, but you just want to dial down the intensity. So for Gimli, you were in a while ago that car alarms and fire alarms really bother him. Can he listen to them from a distance? Are you able to get him up to enough of a distance to deal with it?
I mean, car alarms are always at a distance for him. But yeah, I've been doing it where I kind of have, like, you can look up sounds on anywhere on the internet and just have the volume on your computer really low and kind of build it that way.
Yeah.
So that's what I do with him.
Yeah, yeah, that's what we tell people in the puppy program to do as well.
Yeah.
You know, and you have no the humans have no choice over what the distance is. It's definitely what the dog can deal with. I know when we first started working with Maddie with other dogs, like her distance was from my sunroom here down to the agility field, which is a couple of football fields probably, and you know, she would see dogs that were so far in the distance I thought they were ants, and she would still go off on them. It's gotten better, but I didn't have any choice. I had to work with where she could be, you know. Yeah, and agility is a good example too. Another different example, and you know, the teeter in agility is the big thing for everybody, because the teeter, of course, drops out from under the dog as they're going across it. It drops. And so we start the teeter with no movement whatsoever, and then we just try to increase the tip a couple of inches, maybe an inch at a time in the beginning, just so that the dog can deal with it. And sometimes we have a hard time convincing people that they shouldn't go from, you know, a couple of inches to a full drop, because they're going, oh, the dog's fine, the dog will deal with it. No, they won't. Not at all.
Well, and when they refuse to listen and they do it, then they see why we have.
Yeah, I was going to bring that up. Thank you. You can bring it up. and then it
there's always that moment.
Yeah, that's okay. And then it's a long time to get them back over it again. Because it is a pretty scary thing for any dog, you know, that's for sure. Yeah. So what's next?
How do you know when it's working?
When they're over threshold? No, sorry.
No.
I think you skipped yeah. Okay. I think you missed one, because I remember I was going to answer that one.
How do you know when your dog is over threshold? Okay. Sorry.
So obvious signs that your dog is over threshold is when they're barking and lunging.
Yeah.
And I know that's a hard one, again, for the reactive dogs out in the street, because people just freeze because you are panic stricken, and your brain shuts down as well. But again, you know, what we try and do is we get people to practice until it is an automatic muscle memory thing, just to turn, go, and get out of the situation. And we spend a lot of time teaching people how to get out of those situations. So that's obvious. Less obvious is that your dog is unable to take food. And people, that's usually when somebody comes in and I don't know their dog, and they say to me, oh, when we go out in the world, you know, my dog doesn't want food. They're not food motivated. And I know at that point they are either totally overwhelmed by all the distractions in a good way, or they're totally overwhelmed in a fearful way, and they just can't deal with taking food. So that's definitely a good sign. Even if they take it, but they grab it out of your hand, that's another. That's a dog that's over threshold. Even though they might not be barking and lunging, a dog that grabs food out of your hand is probably either over threshold or a lab. Sorry, I just had to throw that in. And the other thing is, you know, the third sign is that they are unable to process any of your verbal cues. They just can't listen to you because the rational side of the brain is just gone. So those would be the big three. And so what do? Again, you just get the dog out of the situation distance-wise, or you try and lessen the intensity somehow. So if it's sound, you can turn it down. If it's a visual trigger, you just turn and go the other way. Yeah, that's how you get out of there. That's your first priority, actually, is to get out. Because if your dog is over threshold, it's very hard for your pet owner to work with at all.
So I just have kind of a question, I guess.
Sure.
For the people that we know with puppies, because I see this more with the puppies than the grown-up dogs, as a sign of also being over threshold, them doing that, putting on the brakes and just kind of freezing or hiding behind you, or, you know, just that kind of that freeze action. Because often when they're in that position, they can't take food and they don't really listen to you. They're just kind of like in a survival mode almost, right?
Yeah, yeah. I would say so. I would say anytime a dog can't attend to you, definitely the thinking side of the brain is gone. You know, I even say to people that, you know, and we've said this in the reactive program, if your dog is pulling like a freight train, they are, I don't know if I'd say over threshold, but definitely overexcited, because if the leash wasn't there, they'd be gone.
Yeah.
And they wouldn't be able to listen to you. So I think dogs are old. I think they are shut down that way a lot more than people realize. Especially, that's a good example, because the puppy's just sitting behind you. And they might look really quiet, but we know that dogs who are flooded, and flooded is when a dog is totally overwhelmed and they completely, instead of lunging, barking, they just completely shut down because they feel like they can't escape from the situation.
Yeah.
So that's an interesting one. Is flooding the same as over threshold? I don't know.
Well, because the solution is the same, really.
Distance.
Create more distance. So
yeah, and I think people, that's a good point. I think people need to realize that if your dog is hiding behind you, they are trying to create more distance, and you do need to give it to them. For sure. Yeah. Okay.
Now we're back to where I thought we were.
There we go.
How do you know when it's working?
Well, as I said, you know, you'll get that look of, some of you will get that look of happy anticipation when they see the trigger. So, and that means they've started to understand that the trigger does predict the appearance of really great stuff. So that is the start of developing that positive association. But then again, I've got Maddie, who doesn't give me that look when she's in those situations. So the best I can hope for from her is sort of a neutral body language. But I want to go back and talk about this a little bit more, because we just touched on it a minute ago. What I rely on with Maddie is choice. If Maddie chooses to participate willingly in the process, we can continue to move forward. And she knows, I'm sure she knows at this point, because we've been doing all of these things for so long, that if at any time she stops or she wants to leave, that's it. I will stop too. It is her choice. And if she doesn't come back willingly within a minute or so, then we're done. We're done for the day. And that is so, so important for people to understand. I remember after we had the whole incident, I think it was just last year, with the meds, and the meds worked the opposite way to the way they should have, and she ended up being very, very paranoid of anything we had done that week. And dog who used to get her nails trimmed, I couldn't, because I did a little bit of nail trimming that week, and I was actually sitting on a stool doing it. After we pulled her off the meds, I couldn't trim her nails, and if the stool was in the house, I couldn't get her out of the crate. So I remember for several afternoons just sitting here in the living room throwing cheese into her crate with the door open. I wasn't going to ask her to move forward. I wasn't going to. I was sitting on the stool at a distance, the furthest distance I possibly could, and I just threw cheese for days and days and days. I even, if she wasn't in the crate, if she was in the kitchen, she'd be under the table, I would actually throw the cheese behind her so she knew she had the choice to get further away if possible. So I think it is hugely important that people understand that you have to give your dog the ability to leave the situation if they're stressed. If they're stressed, you cannot make them feel better. They can't think when they're stressed, and you're just going to sensitize them more because they don't feel in a scary situation. I think the first thing you want to feel is that A, you're safe, and B, you have some control. And so we have to give that, and that's really hard. That is really hard to do that, you know, especially for pet owners. As I said, everybody wants the dog to feel better and they want to accomplish it. So it is, if people don't understand the process, there is a tendency, there is a temptation to say, come on, you can do this. So we have to avoid that at all costs. Yeah. So there are three sort of scenarios that dictate that next step. And if your dog looked okay, if they show you neutral or happy anticipation, then maybe you can start to move forward in your plan. If you're not sure how the dog feels about it, then we do what we call a stick. So we just repeat. We just hang out at that spot and keep on going until we see some sign from the dog that, yeah, I'm feeling a little bit better. Maybe we can get another, step or two towards that scary thing. And if the dog is showing signs of fear, this is the most important one, you drop back. So if it's distance, you go back. If it's noise intensity, you lower the noise. If it's stepping on the teeter board, you take away the drop. So super important that if your dog does not look comfortable, that you do not try and coerce them forward in any way. Yeah, absolutely.
Yeah, and I think that's part of the frustrating part for people who just want to get it done. And plow through it. They don't realize that sometimes you're going to be backstepping and then going forward and then backstepping. And
yeah, absolutely. And that is the advantage that trainers have, is if I'm doing some sort of counter conditioning process with a dog, I don't have that emotional investment. And I just sit there and think, well, I don't even have it with my own dogs anymore because I know it backfires. But I just sit there and I say, okay, well, we're going to hang out. We're going to get as far as we can. I'll just work with you. And if we don't get it today, if it takes us 6 months, we'll get it maybe in 6 months, and that's it. I don't, no pressure whatsoever. You can't. Yeah.
So why isn't it working?
Oh, okay. So there are some common mistakes that people make. First of all, underestimating or forgetting how scary the scary thing actually is. Like seriously, a cheese tube. Even I look at her at times and go, "Really, the cheese tube?" Or nail trimming. I don't think I'm ever going to have 3 dogs. I'm never going to have dogs that look at me when I pull out the brush or the clippers and go, oh my gosh, I'm so excited. This is going to be wonderful. Never going to happen. But at least they're here and they're not on leashes and they're not contained, and they'll stand with me in the backyard and they'll let me brush them while I throw, 1,000 microscopic pieces of kibble on the ground for them to eat because I'm lazy at this. And that's the best that going to happen. That's going to happen here. But we have to remember that they are afraid of things at times. I don't think my dogs are afraid of it. They're just not thrilled about it. And sometimes dogs are reacting to things that we don't even see. So we don't even see something that they're afraid of because it's just very subtle and we've missed it. So, and that's when we tend to say, oh, what's the matter? Come on, let's just, go this way. Whereas the dog, there might be something over the dog is terrified of, So definitely, no pressure. Pressuring doesn't work at all. Sometimes your good stuff isn't good enough. Dog people, sometimes I'll say to people say to me, well, it's not working. And I say, my first question always is, what's in your hand? And dry dog cookies, kibble, it's not going to work in most cases because you have to find something super, super special, high value. And if you're smart, you will save it just for this. So it's really special. So, if I'm not sure, if I got chocolate and Brett brought me home chocolate chip cookies from Anina's this morning, that was really exciting. However, if you brought me home chocolate chip cookies from Anina's every day, I might not be so excited by day 8. I'd still eat them, but it wouldn't be quite as exciting. So if you save special stuff for special times, it always ups the value of that. So work with anything, no matter how disgusting you think it is. I know that there are dog trainers out there that get their students to use anchovies and sardines and tripe and all sorts of really stinky, smelly things. So do a taste test with your dog and see what they think is really, really something, and save it for them. So you definitely need to use high value stuff. It's not a time to be cheap. And again, what we're just talking about, make sure that the dog stays under threshold. If they're not taking the food, you need to drop the threshold, and move to where the dog can deal with it. And if we're pushing too quickly, and this is so hard, if you push too fast, you're going to end up going backwards. So what we want people to understand is that the dog drives the process. It's their choice to move forward. I keep saying this over and over again, but it's very hard for people to remember this. They can move forward, they can move backward, they can stay, their choice. Because it is an emotion and it's not a behavior, and you don't want to get upset with them. The dog can't make a mistake in this process. It's not like you're changing a behavior where the dog does something you don't want them to. And to be honest, even then, if the dog's doing something you don't want them to when you're trying to change behavior, that's your fault anyway. But don't get upset with your dog, because they are just trying to get to a place where they feel safe. So the slower you go, the faster it will go in the long run. And we say that about all training, but it's definitely really crucial in this situation. So quickly, the rules: dog has to feel safe. It's always their choice. They can always walk away if they want to. The scary thing always has to predict good stuff, good food. Remember, you're changing an emotional response, not a behavior. Don't move to the next step until you see neutral or positive. And something I didn't mention, you don't have to do this over and over and over again. You don't have to do this for 20 minutes. You want a short session, just like we talk about dog training, where you do it for 2 minutes at a time. 20 cookies in your hand. And the other thing is, you don't want to set it up as a practice. It's always better as a sort of a random thing that happens, sporadically, or happens, just out of the blue, because your dogs catch on. So, if you're out in the street and you see a dog that your dog is afraid of, or something that your dog is afraid of, and you can do your desensitization counter conditioning, that was great. That's very impactful. If you did it over and over again, let's go behind the car, let's come out, let's go behind the car, let's come out, it's not going to have as much impact. So those random single episodes are much more effective than practicing over and over again. Yeah. Okay.
All right.
Where are we at?
Does it always work?
No. No, it doesn't. Good news, bad news. There's a lot of factors in this situation, a lot of parameters. First one is genetics. What caused the fear? And some dogs, fear can be passed on genetically, and not through the parents, through the mother. If dogs have a fearful mother, puppies can be afraid. Mother can influence the puppies while they're young. If she's fearful, she can influence them to be fearful as well. If you have a dog who comes out fearful, that's a really tough one. I have one of those. At 3 weeks, there were issues there. Took her anyway. I'm glad we did. But will I ever change who she is completely? No. Will I ever eradicate all of the things she's afraid of in life? No. Certainly we continue to work on it, because I can work her through some things. The cheese tube's an interesting example. I've gotten to the point where I can stick my finger in the cheese tube and she'll eat the cheese off my finger. And that for her was a huge step, because after she was afraid of the cheese tube, and the reason she was afraid of the cheese tube was because one day it had an air pocket and it just made a little splat. And I swear if I hadn't had her on the long one, she would have been in Stouffville. But after I didn't expect it. But then after that, she generalized, and dogs do generalize fears to other situations. She was afraid of cheese after that. So I was throwing cheese out in the backyard one day and I couldn't figure out why she wouldn't eat the cheese. So for me to be able to stick my finger in here and have her lick it off my finger with the cheese tube in the other hand is a big step. Mm-hmm. Will we ever get to the cheese? I don't know. That's the thing about fear, is you don't know. And, it depends also. So if it's a learned experience, especially if it's a one-off, so say you had a younger dog, and we'll get into age in a minute, but you had a young dog and, they played with a ton of dogs. And they were great with other dogs, super social. And then one day, their dog, got ticked off with it and gave them a nip or something like that. Your chances obviously are better of coming back from that situation than me bringing Maddie back from anything like that, because your dog would have what we call padding, lots of good experiences to pad up with. And so that one incident, you might be able to counter condition your dog through that one incident and get them back. Might. There's no definites. There's no definites at all in this situation. That's another example. The age of the dog too. Definitely, we all know, or at least we know, that it's really important to, for puppies can to go out there in the world and socialize. And I've seen a lot of puppies overcome fear down on the field. They come to the play groups, and some of the puppies can't even come out in the field in the beginning. So we let them choose. They stay on the other side of the gate and work their way in. And we know it's because of that magical socialization period. And nobody's sure when it ends, 14 weeks, 16 weeks, but puppies' brains are more flexible at that point and they can get over stuff a lot more easily. And, another parameter too is the human. The human is always a big influence in any training, whether the human is willing to take the time, patience, and whether they're willing to stick it out long enough to see any sort of result. And that one's hard. Like the one in the kitchen, Maddie, we've been working with her pretty much every day of her life for 8 years on stuff. That's a long time. That's an awful long time. And the last sort of parameter about that is interesting, control. Whether the dog is going to feel in control of the situation, whether they're going to be able to get through it, whether they have choice and control. So there's a lot of different parameters. When you're working with fear, there's a guy out there, we had to study him when I was in the academy, Joseph Ledoux, and he's researched fear all his life. And he says that fear is really, really easy to instill in, I don't know if he's talking about humans, dogs, or both, but he says it's very hard to eradicate. And certainly, I think dogs remember fearful experiences a lot more than they remember non-fearful ones. I know I had huge issues with horses when I first started riding, and I remember the scary moments a lot more than I remember the non-scary moments. The scary ones still stick in my head. So there's a lot of factors. I believe that you can reduce fear, and the other parameter, actually, I hadn't thought about it, is whether you're willing to also use medication with a fearful dog. And
for yourself or the dog?
Well, I use wine. Wine is good. Wine is good. And meds didn't work for my dog anyway. At least those meds didn't. But I would try again with something else. Mm-hmm. But everybody has this knee-jerk reaction to, oh, putting my dog on meds or some sort of social stigma, my dog's a loser or something, or they think there's going to be side effects, my dog will never get off them. But sometimes, I tell people, okay, let's try counter conditioning, let's make sure we do it right. Let's try it for 3 weeks, maybe a month. And if it doesn't work and it is affecting the dog's quality of life, then it's time to talk about meds. Because if you can reduce the dog's fear through meds, that will enable the counter conditioning process possibly to be more successful. And then you might be able to take your dog off meds eventually, or they might stay on meds.
We had a conversation about this once before, and I had heard it compared to physiotherapy. If you're in too much pain to do the physio, you won't be able to do it. But if you can take the edge off of it somehow, it helps you kind of go through your process. You can't do anything when you're in that state.
Yeah, that is a good analogy for sure.
Mm-hmm. So it's not necessarily forever. It's just to kind of help you through a situation as well.
Yeah.
Sometimes.
There's no guarantee with anything. But if we didn't live on a farm and we didn't have private forest for Maddie to walk in, if we lived where you live in Cornell, I would not have given up on the meds. I would have been out looking for another one. Because there are a lot of different meds. Just because the first one might not work, if you have a good vet behaviorist, they can put different alternatives in there for you. But I would definitely have found meds for Maddie. She's in a good place now, but I wouldn't have been able to cope in a more urban area for sure. So I wouldn't have thought twice about it. Yeah. So I think we have one.
Yeah, one more. What is the best thing? And this will help the people who have questions in the comment board right now. What is the best thing I can do for my dog to prevent fear from developing?
Well, socialization period. Absolutely. As we just said, their brains are much more flexible. Expose them to, because novelty is a really big one. I have Rosie who thinks that new stuff is like the greatest thing in the world. And Maddie, anything new, she immediately looks at me and goes, oh God, this is going to be awful. She's so paranoid about anything new. So and we talked about the fact that novelty is dangerous for dogs, or they've been encoded to think it is. So exposing them to new stimuli, but doing it in a balanced, reasonable way. Let's toss out the whole thought that you have to expose your dog to 100 new situations and 100 new people in 14 weeks. That would blow, if I was a puppy, that would blow my brains out. Yeah. So expose them to new stimuli. And when my guys were puppies, anytime they saw anything new, I didn't even wait to I didn't care what their response was. It was like, oh yeah, there's something new here. Have some treats. It's not counter conditioning. You're not trying to change their emotional response. You're just trying to establish a good one in the first place. It's classical conditioning. So, pair any new stuff with high value reinforcers. Let your dogs be at a distance from anything new. I've seen videos from my puppy people. The dogs just kind of see something and they sit. And they're just looking, and that's fine. You give them time and you give them that space that they need in order to process the situation. I hear from a lot of people that, oh my God, I take them out and they just sit down. And sometimes, and a lot of the time I think, okay, that's just a puppy trying to process the world. Give them time, because you really don't have to walk 3 miles today with your puppy. Just take them out and let them sit and look and be okay, and throw them a couple of cookies. That would go a long way, because after that socialization period is over, we always talk about the window closing. It's much, much harder to work with fear. I think it was Joseph Ledoux that said that you cannot 100% eliminate fear. Again, he said it's the easiest thing to instill in someone and the hardest thing to eradicate. So, and even in puppyhood, and when dogs are younger, at about 6 months, and then again around a year, this there isn't scientific research on this that's been proven, but they do talk about fear periods in puppies. Puppies go through fear periods. Young dogs go through fear periods, maybe around 6 months. Even adolescents, they say it's a year. And it doesn't mean that your dog's going to suddenly be afraid of everything they see. It just means that they go through these periods where they're a little bit more sensitive to the world. And that's the time at which they could develop more fears. So that's something you want to watch for. It's not as though your puppy comes out of puppyhood and at 16 weeks and you go, yay, we're out. We don't have to worry about fear anymore. You do. You do. You always have to worry about it. And people are calling me all the time to say, oh, Lord, my dog's 8 months old or my dog's 6 months old and they've just developed a fear of something. So you want to watch for those periods. You want to watch your dog, and if you do see that happening, again, you want to get in there with the high value reinforcers and go, that's okay, here, have a couple of sardines, no problem with that, so you just want to watch and be careful. So in terms of help and getting through this, I know there are trainers out there said to me that you can't teach owners to do really good counter conditioning. And you know what, we're talking about it today, but it's hard. They drilled it into our heads in Jean Donaldson's Academy. We had to do training plans, we had to send videos, we had exams on it. It really got drilled in. And I'm sure I made a lot of mistakes when I came out. I probably still do, not so many anymore, because I've learned just to be really patient, I think. But it is tough. But sometimes, it's economically tough or financially tough to hire a trainer to come in and do that on a one-to-one basis. So we're trying to put together a video program. I'm putting a lot of training plans in for fear of the car, fear of harnesses, body handling, fear of, people and dogs out in the street. Hopefully people will be able to access that, purchase that from us at a reasonable cost and work their way through it. And, if people are really stuck, we're happy to throw in a private consult too, But I think once you kind of get the hang of it and just understand the concepts, which we talked about today, it's something that I think people should learn to do with their dogs, because ultimately you guys are the ones who, the owners are the ones who are going to be with their dogs every day. And so whether you hire a private trainer or whether, you try and find an online course and learn the basics and work on that, it's something that it's not going to happen overnight. And it does take, regular work. You can't just sort of leave it for a week or two and then go back to it. I don't think you can. I think people need to attend to it fairly regularly. So, we're there if people need help. That's for sure. Even just to drop the training plans and then let people go off and work on the training plans, which is what we're trying to do in this course. Here's the plan, here's the steps, here are the basic concepts. See if you can go and do it. And if you run into trouble, we can get onto their Facebook. So we're hoping that the information today and the information in the course will help. So do we have any questions?
We have comments on what pups are afraid of. So we have a lot like thunder and lightning. That's a popular one. So noise sensitivities, cars, bikes. Fear barking at strangers and wants to charge them, but gets close and then is super friendly. Oh, we know that one.
Yes.
So that's another thing, is identifying what is actually fear and what is just excitement and over arousal and frustration.
Yeah, and that's hard. That's tough. Actually, I'm not trying to plug the course again, but we actually put in a unit in there on fearful body language so people can identify it. And even if you don't take our course, I think it's really important for everybody to understand what your dog looks like when they're fearful, because if you can't recognize it, you can't help it.
Vacuum cleaners, yes.
Definitely. Yeah. Yeah,
That's a big one.
yeah, vacuum cleaners are pretty big. You know, body handling, noise. You know, I've heard from some trainers that I really respect that noise phobia is a really tough one, and there are a lot of, as I said, some really good trainers out there that don't think you can fix noise phobia without meds. I haven't met too many people who could successfully fix noise phobia. That's a big one.
Yeah. Well, fixes.
Or reduce it even.
Okay, because I was going to say, like, I don't see myself ever fixing Gimli's. I mean, really, to be afraid of a fire alarm is, I mean, I jump too, right? I don't know anybody who doesn't jump when they hear that.
Yeah, and Gimli can cope with the world. Like,
Yes.
it didn't change his life, but I have met some dogs that are so afraid of noise they literally couldn't leave their house.
Yeah. So that's going to be hard. Yeah, that's when you want to talk to your vets.
Yeah, absolutely.
For sure.
Yeah, your vets and vet behaviors for sure. Sure. Yeah. You know, I think that most dogs in life are going to go through, most dogs in life are going to encounter something they're afraid of, I think. So it's important that people learn to deal with it. You know, even all those happy-go-lucky labs out there. I have a client with a chocolate lab. I don't think he's listening, but too bad. And his dog is such a confident dog that he's terrified of the ice maker that's attached to the fridge.
Okay.
So the fridge door opens, he's gone. So, you know, that's an example of those silly things. It's probably the noise, but there's a super confident dog who's afraid of one thing, you know. Most people are afraid of something in their life. You know, we're all afraid of one thing or two things, or, you know, I don't think there's a lot of people that go through life without being afraid of something. So why should our dogs are the same? Our dogs are the same. So it's important that people at least understand what they can do with it, you know. So any other questions, Celeste? Are we good for today?
No, I think we're good.
Okay. Well, if anybody does have questions, please put them in the comments and I'd be happy to answer them. If you do have a dog that's struggling with fear, we're very happy to help you as well. Just, you know, this will go up on our YouTube channel and it'll go up as a recording on our Drop the Leash page. And yeah, so thank you everybody for hanging out with us today and listening to us. And hopefully we'll be back with something next week. Every week I say, if anybody has a suggestion or if there's anything you want us to talk about, just put that in the comments as well, and we'd be happy to do a Facebook Live. We can come up with the topics, but I always think it's better if it's something our clients actually need. It's something that they need to know about, so we're happy to do that for them. So thank you, Celeste, and we'll see you next week, everybody. Stay safe. Thanks again.